But just like David made that catch, which led to the New York Giants winning the Super Bowl, David also caught Christ. And he's a huge proponent of his Lord and Savior, and he's here today to witness and encourage us. So please welcome David Tyree.
All right, is this mic on? We're good? It's just in case I'm walking around. How's everybody doing? Rising, the morning sun has risen. We're alive. Hopefully this is a room full of forgiving people, right? We have a lot to be excited about, right? I'm sure we got some Packer fans, right? Let's just get that out the way. Oh, yeah. Right? Don't worry, I love the Packers too. They're the most friendliest fans in the National Football League. I've never beat a team so badly, and they just wave us goodbye. I think I'm undefeated in Lambeau Field as a player, and so you guys are fantastic as well. So any Patriots fans just by virtue? Yeah, so the devil's not here clearly. So that's great. And any Giants fans? No way? Okay, just making sure. I know we got a Buffalo fan. Dallas fans usually find their way. They're like rats. They usually find their way. But no, I just always like to make light of, because, sport has this dynamic ability to unite, right? To unite, to inspire, to captivate, and to do so many things, right? And even having the significant opportunity and the gift from God, I would say, to have this ginormous experience, moment, captivating, crowning moment. And for me, it really serves as a monument. It serves as a monument of God's power and ability to do the impossible, to do the miraculous, to do what couldn't really be conceived in the mind of a man, but certainly at least to consider that there are moments in the human experience that are to be pondered, to create a sense of awe. And I'm privileged just to be here, but I understood that not only was I the recipient of God's kindness and grace in February 3rd, 2008, I realized that there were some things that I was chosen for. And I'm hoping that as I share a little bit of our journey today, I'm going to talk about overcoming the world, because everybody's living in this human experience. Anybody have some things to overcome currently right now in their lives? Yeah. I'm just looking for a quick witness, because I can tell you right now, I'm overcoming. But even so, as I'm overcoming, I've had the great joy and the privilege of being an overcomer. And so as long as we're going to live in this world, the way that Jesus says it is 1 John 5:4. It says, "For whatever is born of God overcomes the world." Whatever is born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Right, so just kind of giving us a little bit biblical backdrop before I get into some storytelling, because, man, I am thrilled. I never would imagine, right? So Paul asked me when I came in, he said, "Do you want your name tag?" And I just made this outright outlandish assumption that I think I'll be pretty easy to find the big black guy sitting in the middle of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I don't think I'll need a name tag today. I think we're all in the company, but we all have something in common. This tremendous desire to excel. I feel like God, understanding that we have this belief, God put some hardwiring in humans. And the hardwiring is proven itself throughout the human experience. And he put two things primarily that we're hardwired to do. And that's to be fruitful and to multiply. What does that mean, to be fruitful? It just means to be successful. It means to be successful in the endeavors of what we have to do, right? And I think there's some things intrinsically that every human wants to do. Every human wants to be successful, right? And for whatever reason, and there is a big reason, which I'll probably allude to as we share some stories, there's tremendous obstacles to being successful. And then the last thing that we have, which is a natural, but I also believe that even in relation to the opportunity that we have here today, we talk about covering the world in Christ with C-Suite for Christ. You guys are a part of something, it's the needed, refreshing element that can galvanize and really bring life to our faith. Because sometimes, even though we have this faith, it's not flourishing. And we need to find the tribe that God would give us to get into a space, an ecosystem where we can find alignment and flourish. And I believe that that's what C-Suite gives every single one of us. Just, hey, how do we align, right? What do we have in common that not only can I explore my faith, not only can I fulfill a mission, but how can I walk in a deeper sense of purpose? So everybody excited about, just this life on earth and waking up and having this opportunity? I am. I don't know. So the first thing, as I'm talking about overcoming the world, there's this human element. So eventually you want to reproduce, you want to multiply. And I can tell you, I'm 44 years old. I'm kind of at that mid stage where observations and the sobriety of life is like right there. It's like, boom, my oldest son is 22 years old. So, and my youngest daughter is 10. I have 7 children. I have been fruitful and I have multiplied. I have literally taken that by the horns and just given God my best. And And trust me, those kids are giving me their best. They're giving me a run for my money and challenging me to be more like Christ every single day because I have wanted to kill those kids for 22 years. So in light of that, I do want to get into sharing with you guys a little bit of my background, my journey. I am born and raised in the Great Garden State, so it's great to be here with you in the Midwest. Here we go. A little dirt, like in my, if you want to call it my Ebonical vernacular language, it would be dirty jers is what we would be known as. And, it's fun for me because I grew up at a time where, of course, if you want to call it black culture, hip hop culture was being embraced. I grew up in this really sweet spot. Newark is kind of the epicenter of business and life in North Jersey. And my parents went to West Side. I was fortunate to move into East Orange and eventually find my way into this really neat community that some people might know about called Montclair, New Jersey. It was like a river of diversity and community and opportunity. It was the most, I would say, a natural environment where there was authentic diversity, not forced diversity. Right. I know, like we got DEI initiatives, and as much as I agree that we could improve in everything, it shouldn't be an agenda. Right. I think that's what liberty gives us the opportunity to do is make the best decisions according to justice and equity. And everybody is going to have a different view of that. So when I think about what I walked into as a 10-year-old kid going through some of this journey, I grew up in a divorced home, but I had parents who were supportive. I had parents and I was able to evolve and, kind of understand that, what? We don't get the chance to choose the family that we're born into, right? That's the unique reality about our families. And all of our families have something that we're probably not the proudest of at certain times, right? So, but I'm fortunate that at least my parents were supportive. They had some tremendous sense of work ethic. And although I grew up without my father in the home, man, he was the aching heart for his children. So I will say that that's a little bit of the backdrop. But Montclair, when I moved to Montclair, that was where, right around 10 years old, and that was where sports actually happened for me. East Orange, New Jersey is a lot more urban. It's a lot more rugged. If you've ever heard, a famous rap song, there was this song in the 90s called Hip Hop Hooray, Ho. Those are the vibes, right? Good times, right? So, but it was a lot more rugged in East Orange, and Montclair provided this unique, authentic ecosystem of opportunity. And man, I was, trust me, I was edgy. I'm from Essex County, and I was edgy coming in as a little snotty-nosed kid, 5th, 6th grade, and everybody, that's the proving ground. Those are the social years. And I tell you what, I got myself into a lot of trouble, for our times. I got arrested with a stolen car issue. I wasn't, I got a ride. I got a chance to ride. I didn't know how to drive, but I was in the 7th grade. In the 8th grade, I had another encounter with the law. And obviously, I take account for my own decisions. You don't know how to do that as a child. But yeah, was I hanging with the wrong people? Yeah. But did they force me? No. Right? So when I'm talking about this, I think we have to move toward the sense of maturity and understanding that though we have negative influences, every decision we make is our own. And those decisions cost me. I was forced in the 8th grade after 2 years of back-to-back encounters with the law enforcement and one more arrest from being potentially, locked up in juvenile, Jamesburg is what we call it. I remember being at the court office with my mom, and I could just see the stress. It was just unimaginable that I was putting her through as this little teenage Rudy Poo. And that was a crossroad moment for me where I said, I'm going to change my friends a little bit. I'm going to focus on sports. And sports was the budding eco-social system of my community. There was no football until I moved to Montclair, New Jersey. So it's important that I share it because the first thing I'm really going to talk about is overcoming sin. When we talk about overcoming the world, the first thing we have to overcome is sin. Now, obviously, we have this common community and relation where we could talk about sin and it's not taboo, right? So we can be here and talk about the fact that lawlessness abounds in our heart. There's something in me has this urge to do what is not right. And it's just that simple. It's something in me, right? The moment that you tell me what's right, there's an urge to do what I want to do. And even for many of us who were raised in the church, and I can tell you right now, I was not. Oh boy, I was a good old grade A American heathen. That was my story. I don't know about you. They could USDA prime American heathen, meaning like now we had respectable values, right? We weren't trying to rob people, steal from people, but my mom just had her beliefs and ideas at that stage of her life, and she gave us a lot of liberty. She gave us a lot of liberty. I will tell you, it's not the righteous thing to do, but there was her profound wisdom in the sense that I'm not going to force anything on my children. But boy, that you're running a risk by not shaping and creating a pathway that will lead to truth, liberty, and justice. And I ran that risk, but sports, I will say, was an element that gave me discipline and guardrails. So that community is so central to my story. But when I'm talking about overcoming sin, I'm talking about overcoming every way that rejects the way that God has appointed for his own creation. That's where we find sin. Every person that is rejected, because really, if I could have a quick moment to help every one of us, there's only two kingdoms in the earth. There's the kingdoms of our Christ, and there's the kingdom of darkness. So if we're not in the kingdom of Christ, by default, we fall under the kingdom of darkness. And if you are your own Lord, which I was until I was 24 years old, I found myself by default under the kingdom of darkness. But I was privileged. Because of sports, I had purpose. Because of sports, it gave me the opportunity, the passion, and the insight to create a vision for my life outside of New Jersey. Outside of this, right? So even though I had this encounters with law enforcement and I was a little, just a little miscreant, it's called mischief, rebellion too, but just true mischief. I'm raising sons and they're wonderful young men, but boy, I'm telling you, they rough around the edges. Anybody have that experience? Raising a son, oh boy, you rough around the edges. You better be happy I'm not who I once was. I had a few of those conversations and it's okay. But I realized that the only way that we were going to overcome sin, I lived this liberty. And I will say this, because nothing was forced, I was able to draw my own conclusions. I was the captain of my own ship. So when I fell and I fell hard, that hurt. Let's not do that again, right? And I'm parenting children in literally the opposite way of which I was raised. But because I didn't have a law over my head, I was free. I was subject to my own law. But I couldn't kind of blame it on my mom. I couldn't blame it on my dad. And I was just fortunate to have what I call the sport of football as a surrogate father. Why? Because it gave me identity. It gave me a sense of purpose. It gave me discipline. That's the beauty of sports in any instance. It's not a bad thing. But in light of my father being the absence of physical presence in the home, there were missing opportunities to have deeper values, more meaningful values. So moving on, we're talking about overcoming sin. I was the embodiment of it. I was my own law. And I'm going to tell you what, I was doing well. I was out here being fruitful. I wasn't the most committed student, but obviously as these scholarship opportunities started rolling in, I began to find success as an athlete. I'm out here checking the boxes, about 20 plus scholarship offers. End up choosing Syracuse University. Those were my dark days. Those were my dark days because I started drinking alcohol at 14 years old, marijuana 15, And my home was literally the embodiment for foolishness, because my mom had this idea that if they're going to make foolish decisions, I'd rather have them doing it in the home than out in the street. I call it a worldly wisdom, because thank God we didn't kill ourselves in the home, right? Because I pretty much had every opportunity. My mom would, every weekend, especially by my junior year, I would have a 40-ounce, a half a pint of Jack Daniels, and smoke a blunt to the head. I had ridiculously destructive behaviors with my substances. And really, when you talk about addictions, it's a mask for pain, right? It doesn't matter what addiction, whether it's sex addiction, porn addiction, alcohol addiction. Addiction is a mask for pain. And I didn't know what I was dealing with. As I evolved and I came into the light, I realized, man, I was deeply wounded through rejection, right? Just these wounds, the fear of rejection. And alcohol will take those wounds away, make you more bold, make you more confident, make you all the things that you think you need to be. But it was certainly at an expense. So it didn't cost me much in high school, but by the time I got into college, those were the blackout years. Those were the blackout years. So I masked this hypocritical identity by virtue of finding tremendous success as an athlete. I was even, honored. Listen, man, I was a pretty intelligent guy. Once they put me on probation for basically being lazy, then I just kind of rolled off 3.7, 3.6. I was too prideful to be on probation. I was committed to the sport in college, but I wasn't committed to being excellent as a student. But once you take away my time and you make me feel like an idiot, I'm like, okay, you think I'm stupid. You think I'm stupid. I'm going to show you 3.7, 3. So I was a respectfully intelligent man. But I struggled. I struggled with finding the success that I felt like I deserved and desired, and nothing came easy. So overcoming sin for me really came at the pinnacle of what was supposed to be my crowning moment. 2003, I was drafted in the 6th round by the New York Football Giants, the hometown team. Guess what? Secret information is I grew up hating the Giants. I grew up absolutely hating the New York Football Giants. I was born in the 80s, baby. Literally 1980, the San Francisco 49ers were running the world. Joe Montana, Tom Rathman, all my friends I know we can remember, Jerry Rice, John Taylor, Brett Jones. It was the best. And guess who comes along? And it was this guy named Leonard Marshall and some guy named LT, and they end up breaking Joe Montana's back, and I had a vendetta against the New York Giants. Until 2003 when they wrote me a check. All of a sudden, all their sins have been washed away. And I was fortunate to be drafted to the New York Football Giants as a special teams player. If you're not super savvy on the football end, I did all the things that most people don't want to do on the football team. I ran down on kickoff. I covered punts. I blocked kicks. And I have a talk where I talk about self-awareness was my superpower. Because nothing was coming easy in those college years other than blackouts, that was the only thing that came easy. Syracuse is known as one of the biggest party schools in the country, biggest bar cultures. And that was all I knew to do every weekend. I probably didn't miss a weekend and sprinkled in a good Thursday or Friday to get inebriated to the point where I don't even remember exactly what I did. I can remember waking up in different people's homes, not just completely unconscious, but actually in the moment I was concerned. But when we get around one another, I would masquerade that through our pompous, youthful, hey man, you was bent, you was twisted, oh man. But I can tell you this, I was concerned. I was concerned. I didn't know exactly if I slept with somebody waking up naked. I had concerns, but I certainly didn't know how to overcome this bondage. And as I made my way through the National Football League, God kind of had determined that this was going to be a year of success, but exposure. And I didn't know God. I was not raised in church. I can remember on the count of 10 hands, on the count of my hands, how many times I remember going to church. But I was certainly kind of being drawn as I got to the National Football League in my rookie year. And I remember quite frankly, chapels, I'll say this respectfully. I thank God for every place where Christ is welcome. But now knowing Christ, I want all of Christ. And I thank God for those chapels, but most people come into a chapel and it's like a motivational speech with a couple scriptures. And so as I became a Christian, it was kind of like, But this guy, he came in and he has some pep to his step. He has some fire in his heart. And which never happens is there was actually a call to Christ in the chapel service. And I remember, most of us have been in those instances where you feel like they're talking to you. But I remember wanting the glory. I remember wanting the women. I remember wanting everything that I didn't feel like. This time of validation, my heart was resisting it even though I knew I needed it. But there was a buddy who kind of went up first, and I kind of had the buddy system. I was like, okay, well, if he do it, then I could do it. And that was my introduction to Christianity as a rookie in the National Football League. It was my introduction because I was not born again. I didn't have the power to overcome sin. And God favored me, and I was the NFL Special Teams Rookie of the Year. I far exceeded my expectations on the field because I was drafted as a 6th-round special teams player. They said, well, if this guy can run down on kickoff and be disruptive, he could probably make the team. I was one of the few rookie receivers to have a 100-yard receiving game. I far exceeded those expectations. I was the Giants Rookie of the Year, right? But off the field, my life was completely in mayhem. The guardrails of a campus life and the discipline of the itinerary was now gone as a professional. And my life was, behind the scenes, was unraveling. I remember crashing twice on the way to work because I was so hungover. Twice. Once into a graveyard gate and another into the car. And I remember pulling over as I hit this car because, I'm halfway conscious and I'm, like, goodness gracious, this is horrible. And as I sat there, I get out the car, I pull over, I sit there, and I don't know where this car is at. I mean, like, I'm expecting the worst, but this car didn't pull over. I sat there, I'm sitting there looking around. I know I hit somebody, my car's all jacked up. And next thing you know, no one stops. And I carried my drunk behind on into work, smelling like a brewery. And I'm sharing this with you because I didn't have the power to overcome sin. And I know that we receive salvation through grace through faith in the Son of God, right? So lots of people have faith. I want you to understand that. Having faith is human, right? Having faith is human. Having faith in God is what is supernatural. Having faith in God. That's the reason why in Mark 11:22, Jesus, he says, have faith in God. Because I want to give us all the formula of faith because we believe in God. There's a formula to faith. And that's what Hebrews says. Faith is a substance. It's an actual substance. It's just an invisible substance. So if it's a substance, that means it can be realized. And that's the faith that transacts with God. Because I didn't have faith in God, I was futile. Even though I tried to make this confession, God didn't receive my confession. I know that might blow a couple doctrines in here. I made the confession of faith. I said, Jesus, I want you to save me. But I didn't have the power to overcome my sin. Because he says, you confess with your mouth unto salvation, but you believe unto righteousness. So maybe it was the unbelief in my heart in that year that didn't allow for the transaction. I don't know. Call it a mystery. But I certainly wasn't empowered to live a better life. I certainly was a slave to my own desires and ambitions instead of being a slave to Christ. So what happens? Well, if you want to talk about somebody keeping it real, you couldn't find a better guy than me. Because my rookie year in the NFL, I was Mr. Keep It Real. And I smoked the best bud. Now I had the money. People like to believe that money solves issues. Clearly not. Money only amplifies every desire that you already have existing in your heart. Money is just the amplifier that gives access to desire. That's what money did for me. Why? Because, I didn't have too many problems with the ladies, but it just gave me more access to women, right? I was broke, so I didn't have access to marijuana. I was broke, so I could only buy 40 ounces. Now we can buy Hennessy, right? Hey, listen, I was just obeying my gods, right? Why? Because literally in Romans 6, it says we're slaves to whom we obey. We are slaves to whom we obey. And clearly Jesus was not my Lord. So after getting fined, my rookie year, I was reckless. I was a reckless rookie. I had the success on the field. Jim Fossil, that was his last year as a head coach in the NFL. And fortunately, he actually pulls me over at the end of the season and said, I'm going to fine you $10,000. And boy, that was a blow. You know, rookie salary at that time, rookie salaries were $225. You know, they're about $600 now. I'm like, God, whew, boy, inflation in the NFL. You know, so it was great money, obviously, but you know, that was a chunk. That was a good chunk. He said it should have been 40 because I was late so many times. So he actually was showing me mercy. But in my brain, I said, I'm smoking the best stuff. I might as well sell it. So after coming back from Mardi Gras, I was very close with Ryan Clark, ESPN personality. That was my only teammate that I actually hung out with because I was home with my boys in Jersey. I go to pick up half a pound of Purple Haze, some of the best bud at the time, going to New York City, get pulled over with a taillight. And that was the beginning of a new life. As I sat in that jail cell for the first time, I cried out to God in sincerity. I said, God, all I know is I need you. And if you allow me to keep my job, I'd appreciate that too. My first true, sincere prayer, real simple. And from there, I would say there was a domino. We talk about overcoming sin. You have to confess it. You have to confess that I am a sinner. The domino put things into action within about a span of 10 days. You know, I remember I was a functioning alcoholic, so, you know, if there was a social time, I was drinking. And I remember I was with my wife today. We weren't married then, but my wife today. And I was with her brother. We got a 12-pack Corona, drank a beer, and all of a sudden, I finished. I bought it, I'm drinking. I bought it, I'm drinking. And I just didn't have the same urge. And it was inside those 10 days. And my aunt invites me to church, and I figured, well, you know, life is jacked up. I might as well, right? I could use a little comfort, a little song. And I'll never forget, as I gazed at the woman of praise and worship, and she said, you know, she was praise and worship, and it was a Pentecostal church. I didn't know what she was inviting me to, but they was going in, you know. They were going in. It was fantastic. I mean, but there was this woman, and she had all this joy emanating in her face. She's singing to God, and she's just, and I just couldn't get my eyes off of her. And this script releases into my spirit. 24 years old, NFL Special Teams Rookie of the Year, Giants Rookie of the Year. Every dude in here would want to trade places with me, but I don't have the joy this woman has. And next thing you know, I crumbled under the weight of God's presence. I wept for 15 minutes straight in a fetal position. I don't know what happened in that church for the rest of the service, but all I remember was a call to Christ and a surrendering of my life. And from that moment, I had never drank again. I had never spoke again. And Jesus had supernaturally delivered me from guilt, shame, and bondage. And for 20 years, I have been pursuing Christ. That was how I overcame sin. That was how I overcame sin. I was a prisoner to my own ideas, my own ambitions. And although I had success, although I had the crowning joys of what the world would offer me, it was empty. It was vain. And now I had experienced the liberty that Christ had afforded me. So the first thing we have to overcome is sin. How do we do that? Having faith in the Son of God. Having faith in the Son of God. That's the victory. It's going to be your faith. Well, here's the formula for faith. Faith, the first thing you have to do is you have to believe, right? And then we have to either obey or act, right? Obey or act. So you have to believe. Then you have to follow that with your works, which is usually obedience or some form of action, right? Follow the next commandment, the next instruction that's going to lead you to righteousness. And the last thing where people fall away from God, where faith isn't realized, the last thing is endurance. You have to endure. This is where many people are missing out on their eternal purpose for their life. It's great. I'm looking forward to seeing Christ in glory, if he would receive me, but I have to endure. He who endures to the end shall be saved. So the way that I've shared it with the people that I've come across, salvation is not just a work at the beginning. It's not just confess with your mouth and believe in your heart. It says that you got to work out your salvation with soul and with fear and trembling. So that kind of means like there's something I got to do now. Then the last part it says he would endure. So it sounds like there's three things that's tied to salvation. And part of it requires my participation, my yielding, my surrender. Not my work to attain it, but my cooperation to agree with God as my Lord. That is how we overcome sin, through faith in the Son of God. The next thing I really want to hit on is overcoming self. Right? Because, God loves us so much that he saves us, but he loves people so much that he left you here. He loves people so much that he left you here. He loves people so much that he left you as a witness in your job. Right? Because you got to take care of those families. So overcoming self, what the first thing you got to do? You got to let go of your ego. We all grew up with the Let Go My Ego campaign. Just drop 1G. Right? Let go of the ego. Christ gives us the prescription for it because he said I'm supposed to be denying myself daily anyway. Meaning, if I can find solace, refuge, assurance in what he's done for me, just through his forgiveness alone, then that could compel me to think less of myself. Now, not in worth or value, but just think of myself less. Just think of myself less. So we're all on this. As long as we're going to be living in this life, we're going to have to find a way to overcome ourselves. This is so not natural. It's so not natural. Self-preservation is the most natural human instinct, right? So overcoming self is the lifelong pursuit. And how do you do it? You get into a race to the bottom. You get into the race in the bottom. So for me, what did that look like? Well, I'm a new creation now, right? So now we're talking about me in the NFL as a witness for Jesus. Now, my whole simple heart as a young believer was very simple. How do I bring glory to God? I knew nothing about Christianity. And I will say this, my children, their parents are radical lovers of Jesus. And because I didn't have this religious upbringing, it served me well by not convoluting my own ideas about Christ before I actually met him. Because Jesus is a person. I thank God for the Word of God. I thank God for the Holy Scriptures. But even Jesus separated himself from the Scriptures. He actually separated himself, and obviously there was Old Testament. He said, you search the Scriptures. He spoke to a group of Pharisees, to the religious folks. He said, you search the Scriptures, for in them you think you have life, but you refuse to come to me. So we have this idea that the Bible and Jesus is the same. No, the Bible is the instrument of perfect revelation that gets me to Jesus. That's what we all need. We need our God to be real. If you're going to cover the world in Christ, your God has to be real. It can't just be principles and simple actions of devotion. It has to be a burning witness in you that begins to resonate. When I hear Paul speak, there's life. That's the reason why I'm here. And it's just great to be around a bunch of Christians. Right? The reason why I'm here, because there's life. There's life when I hear his witness. There's boldness. He said, God, the righteous will be bold as a lion. Bold as a lion. Right? And I'm going to tell you what, being an athlete, a high-performing athlete, I don't want to be a part of any kind of losing culture. I want to be humble. But humble, the lamb always wins. So when we talk about overcoming yourself, is get over yourself. Empty yourself of ideas. Empty yourself of your stringent beliefs and systems that give you safety, and preserve yourself. Let go of your ego. We have to give ourselves to God. We have to trust in his salvation, not just for the afterlife, but for here. Your salvation is not going to heaven. Your salvation is God's provision for you here in the earth. That's your salvation. So what did that look like for me, man? I'll tell you what, I was the Christian you did not want to meet when I was saved after my first year. I was raw, wrong, and righteous. I was raw, wrong, and righteous all at the same time. It was fantastic because why? When you're a child, you don't do the right things. I can tell people this is the way I say it. You can do the right thing the wrong way. Right? We're talking about business people. Right? Many of our frustrations, even with our bosses, is that they're trying to do the right thing and they do it the wrong way. Right? Like they probably mean well, but there's a better way. Right? Now, I think that's where young, passionate Christians can easily find themselves. Kids out here running around, don't know exactly where they're going, busting their head against the wall, but they're trying to do the right thing. And I was I would say that was me as an early year. Just not knowing exactly what the gospel message was, but having influence, having a story that Jesus saved my life. He literally took the taste of alcohol out of my life. I'm no longer ashamed. I can tell people, man, I had STDs, man. Jesus, he healed me. He freed me. I'm out here like, people are like, whoa. And not just people in the world, people in the church. Because I wasn't church, I didn't have colloquialisms. So the church became, after a couple of years, first it was a great family, but after a couple of years, I'm like, hey, man, what's wrong with y'all? You alive? This thing on? Right? So overcoming self has to be the primary pursuit. We have to let go of our ego. We got to let go of that ego in a sense. Why? Just take up your cross. If God is worth saving you, certainly he's worth following. Right? And if we're going to follow him, that means I got to deny myself and then take up my instrument of death. That's what the cross is. I just want to remind us, right? It wasn't a thing of comfort. We find a tremendous exchange, right? But it wasn't a thing of comfort. And the next thing is that race to the bottom. If Christ can put on this human flesh, the Jews had a reason to be jacked up. Like everything in their book told them that the flesh is disgusting. These humans, there's nothing good in them. But God, understanding our frailties, he humbled himself. He humbled himself by coming on, taking on this flesh for us, sympathizing with us in our weakness, right? And I think that we can imitate that, right? If you're married like me, I've been married 20 years in June. I'm super excited about this. Now, I'm going to tell you what, my wife is smoking hot. I'm like, she is smoking hot. I'm winning in life. And if nothing else, I'm winning in life because of my God and my wife. Bank account could use some help, so, I appreciate it, Why? Because I got 7 kids. They keep eating, right? So it's been great. So overcoming self. And the part, even where we're even as people who have belief, who have faith, who are looking to be a witness, looking to be effective, looking to be excellent, right? Everything that you do, you got to do it unto the Lord. So for me, when I was in the National Football League, I was going to destroy people in the name of the Lord. I was going to run down a kickoff and hit them as hard as I could in the name of the Lord. And by my 3rd season, I was all pro. I should have been all pro all first 3 seasons. Trust me. I'm not going to get too deep in that rabbit hole. Right? All pro. Right? I have this opportunity. I'm kind of rubbing out some of my edges, even starting to learn how to relate to my teammates a little better. Right? Because now I'm the guy who wants to talk about Jesus. Who am I around? Jeremy Shockey at the time, pure wild man. Michael Strahan, fantastic dude, but not, there's some stuff underneath the curtains that you'll be displeased by. Tiki was pretty solid, but he was all business. Michael Barrow was the living witness for me my rookie year. Tremendous linebacker at the University of Miami. He was one of our leaders. But he was the witness, and he held fellowship at his home. So even my rookie year, when I was calling myself a Christian, I would go to his home. He lived right in Montclair, in the same town I grew up in. And I would go there. I would start drinking because Tuesday was the day off. So he had fellowship on Monday. I start drinking. I got to get it in. Get me a few beers in before I go to fellowship. Hang out for a little while and come home and crush it. But he was a living witness for me. And as I matured toward my 3rd year, we had Kurt Warner come through. Amazing guy. My 2nd year, Eli's rookie year. But I felt like the Lord was kind of bringing me to certain places. Now, what was my goal? Overcoming self. My goal was to be the best special teams player in the National Football League and become the 3rd wide receiver for the New York Football Giants. My 3rd year was actually the year that I accomplished that coming out of training camp. And sadly, after, I call it young Eli, the Eli without the lion's mane, young Simba. We had to kind of go through those years before he grew up and became this championship quarterback. And that was when I was a 3rd wide receiver. So I experienced a lot of disappointment, a lot of front office politics. And they kind of demoted me unmerited after about 4 or 5 games into that year. But God had chosen that would be the same year that I would become all pro. And find sense and satisfaction, but I didn't do it well. So we talk about overcoming self. I didn't do it well. I would go into work and I would put my head down and my hoodie on, and I would just hope that a coach said something to me. I had to overcome myself. I had to learn even more. But I would just hope, because I was amazing with the mental part of the game. That was the reason how I would compete. That was nothing sexy about me. I was like an old 77 Buick. That's my, like these Lamborghinis out here hitting curves, running routes. Me, I'm just a long strider. I'm not too big. I'm not that fast. I just had grit, determination, and a mighty big God. But I did have to learn how to overcome myself, and humility was the way. My 5th season, after striving a little bit, I came to terms that 1 Timothy 6:6 says, godliness with contentment is great gain. I'll finish up here shortly, and I'll share the last 3. Godliness with contentment is great gain. And I really rested in that in relation to my striving and overcoming myself, even as a good witness and as a Christian. But that was the year that we won the Super Bowl. That was the year that we won the Super Bowl. The reason why I hedged it with that scripture was because I had to resolve some things that whatever God had appointed for me was for me. I had to learn how to not be complacent, but still be content, and not force God's hand, and not be a immature witness as a child of God. The last thing I'll talk about is overcoming Satan, or overcoming your adversary, overcoming opposition. There's 2 things we talk about overcome. You have to clear obstacles, right? There are 2 words, overcome, right? You have to clear obstacles and you have to advance. Every single one of us, you have to clear obstacles and you have to advance. You have to come. Where do we have to come? We have to come to the place where God desires for us to be. In the marketplace, right? I'm not trying to, wherever God has given you a sphere of influence, that means that there's a key of authority. And you have to overcome to be able to take that key and rule with God. And I realized that godliness with contentment was giving me the rest and resolve, and that was the 5th season. That was the Super Bowl season. So how did I overcome this opposition? So for me, 5th season, I'm kind of resting, and I'll get to it. Talk you how to overcome. Early in that season, I actually had an injury in training in the last preseason game against the Jets. I missed the first 2 games of the regular season. But around the same time, I had just hired a new accountant. And he was a Christian, wonderful man. And he calls me. He's kind of like scared, but he's like, hey, man, God's just putting something on my heart, and I really have something to share with you. And he says, I said, shoot. He says, God sees your desire to make his name great. And he says, the platform that you have right now as a special teams player is not big enough. He's going to make your name great as a wide receiver. Now, I just get this injury. I'm like, amen. With God, all things are possible. I'm a believer. I believe, right? Now, at the same time, the person who was pouring into my life, I would be up every morning at 5 a.m. We had this thing called Command the Morning Prayer, where we understood that we could, with Christ, we can speak the right things, right? Because faith is a speaking language. You believe and therefore you speak, right? So you have to speak the right things. And I would be up every day at 5 a.m. praying, especially through the time where I was injured, every single day, praying the will of God. In that time, I saw a cloud over the Giants organization. I saw the face of our new general manager, Jerry Reese, who I really didn't even know was a Christian at the time. Now, there was a lot of other things. I have this book that sadly is not even online called More Than Just a Catch. But there were things happening, and God was doing some things. But here I am with this jacked up, fractured wrist. But even at the same time, I just felt like in that season, God was going to do something special. I wrote a letter. I ran it by Coach Coughlin, respecting the authority. And he said, hey, man, I just feel compelled. And I shared it, said some things about what I believe God's going to do in this season. And the road was set. And guess what? There were obstacles. Man, they were full of obstacles. Not only was it the injury, but it was the least productive season I had as a special teams player. I didn't have any access or any inroads to any playtime at wide receiver, which usually came up about with some injuries here and there. I mean, I'm usually killing it as a teamer. I mean, they blocking me now. I'm like, what's wrong with y'all? Let me go. Shake it off, man. I'm the man. Right? And then in a devastating fashion in December, walking out of the Saturday night meeting, being pulled out of a Saturday night meeting as we're preparing in the middle of this playoff push against the Redskins, I find out that my mother passes away. Devastating. Devastating. Right? So we talk about overcoming our adversary, there will be opposition. Right? Overcoming Satan is just overcoming your adversary. Satan's not God's adversary. He's yours. He's not God's adversary. He's the created being. That's why he can go up there and holler at God and talk about Job. He's your adversary. You are the witness. God gave you the power. He gave you the authority. He gave you his son. And he calls us to rule with him. I had to learn these things at the time. I didn't fully understand it, but I was fully walking in faith. Fully walking in faith. As we fast forward, having this David and Goliath type experience in the Super Bowl, now as I come back I missed 2 games burying my mom because I had to fly down to Florida. And obviously I missed so much time in practice. The next week we were playing Buffalo. And so I watched that game after burying my mom on a Saturday. And that was the game that actually locked us into the playoffs. And next thing you know, we're playing the New England Patriots for the last game of the regular season as they're roaring for this undefeated season. We're still talking about overcoming your adversary. Now we're looking at perfection, and we're chomping at the bit. We're chomping at the bit to win this regular season game. And guess what? They were just so good. They were good. They were good, but we got blood. It was blood in the water. It was blood in the water. We had a dynamic team, dynamic leaders. You know, if you're football fans, you've observed Antonio Pierce become the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. He was actually the truest leader on that defense, even though Michael Strahan was OG Bobby. You know, OG Bobby is a good old South Central gang movie reference. Just got to bring y'all in if y'all Netflix. But next thing you know, I come back, and all of a sudden, when I come back from burying my mom, I'm in the game plan. Instead of going 3 wide receivers, we're going 4 wide receivers in passing sets. And I'm like, okay, I should have scored a touchdown in the New England game, but we're not going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the good things. We're going to talk about overcoming. Right? So all of a sudden, the wave's there, and the night before the game, right? So, and the thing to understand about overcoming your adversary, you have a promise, but you'll also have opposition, right? And we have to identify the areas that maybe we've given our adversary access or stumbling blocks in our life and remove them. And that's what I've worked to do over those previous years. Remove those areas of pride or arrogance, or those areas of, where it lacked humility. And as I was growing up, the same woman who had me on this prayer line at 5 a.m. every single day for probably at least 2 months into that season, she was there. Her son was on the team, so he was my teammate. That's how I met her. The night before the game, we're praying. We're believing God. We're praying. She says, David, right? My wife is 8 months pregnant with our twins. They just turned 16 yesterday, right? My Super Bowl babies. My wife is 8 months pregnant. She's praying. We're praying for the blessing of God, and we're just believing God. And she says to me, David, as we're praying, she said, David, God is quickening your feet. He's giving you hinds feet like the feet of a deer to jump high. And then she said, the Lord is putting spiritual glue on your hands. Like, I'll take that. And the last thing she said is, God's going to give you the big play. Right? Now, when she said God's going to give you the big play, I'm going to just tell you, I went right into my mental Rolodex, and there was this play that was literally drawn up just for me. It was a sell-it pop pass is what we called it. And guess what? In the fourth quarter of this amazing defensive battle, if you can remember, there was a defensive battle, 2 Titans going at it in the Super Bowl. And fourth quarter, they score a go-ahead. We score a go-ahead touchdown. It was 7-3, and it was me. I scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl on a pop pass. Eli drills it in there, and I'm like, Jesus, God, you did it. You are the man. Let's go home. OC, Tuck, Strahan, you get him. Keep riling Tom Brady. We're sacking him through the roof. No one can stop our defense. We're going to go home. But can I tell you that God will do exceedingly above all that we could ask, think, or imagine? And that tees up the very image that is seared in the conscience of every sports fan. That 3rd down and 5, where God decided to glorify his own name. God decided to do something that I never could have conceived in my own heart or make imaginable, because he was determined that perfection would reside in him. You know, I kind of like, you know, when I consider God, I do believe that he's always warring for the hearts of his children. I mean, like all his children. You know, there's an exclusivity that we have as unique children, adopted sons of God. But sons of creation, I think he's trying to preserve, and I think he was trying to break the idolatry off of that what would have been an undefeated New England Patriots team. Because there was an air of arrogance at that organization at the time. You know, listen, it just happens. I just felt like God was doing something, even though I don't believe that, you know, I tell people he's moving in people's lives. It's not about who wins or loses. And he just saw fit to make his name great by choosing me to have that opportunity. It says he confounds the low things of the world to put to shame the wise. And C-Suite for Christ, I want to give every single one of you the opportunity to consider how you're going to overcome sin, right? And I mean, like, hopefully we've received that blood washing, that atonement, that forgiveness, that mercy, but even more so, how we're going to overcome self, how we're going to be effective witnesses where we go, how we're going to be effective leaders to our employees, how we're going to be tremendous husbands and fathers, right, wherever we have a sphere of influence. But we have to overcome self. We have to let go of the ego. We have to pursue humility, just like Jesus did by putting on flesh, and it said he became obedient. He became obedient. And the last thing we got to ensure is that we overcome our opposition. We got to overcome our opposition. But how do we do it? Through faith in the Son of God, through belief, through obedience, through endurance. And I want to equip and empower every single one of you through my own story, through my own testimony, that you can overcome the world. You can and will be the light in the life of the world as an effective witness as the Son of God. I thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to be with you, and God bless you. Good
job, brother.
If there's any